everyone for being here today. I'm going to start out with introductions. I think we've kind of all met each other, but just in case you haven't, I'm Mary Martin, and I'm the RSU16 board chair.
I'm Stacy Field, and I am the business manager.
I'm Tina Mazur, superintendent.
Good morning, I'm Melanie Chassie, I'm the assistant superintendent.
I'm Bill Perry from Minot.
Norm Davis, Poland School Committee.
Leo Ferlin, Poland Budget Committee, community representative.
Leonard Lamro, Poland Budget Committee as well.
Mariella Jones, Poland School Committee.
Holly Day, special ed director.
Aaron Willett, Mechanic Falls School Board member.
Jack Wiseman, Mechanic Falls School Board member.
Kim Spencer, principal at Minot Consolidated School.
I'm Ryan Patry, the principal at Elm Street School.
Rick Benoit, principal at Poland Community School.
And John back there, you want to?
John Wally, director of operations for RSU16.
Okay, we want to thank our two people. Would you introduce yourself for people that are here taping today? Thank you for being here. Do we get Holly?
I did.
And this is an important step in our 2016-17 budget process. And by the end of today, what we would like is that you understand the needs and the requests that support student learning. And while it's a long day, it is important for the budget committee to get a full and comprehensive picture of the programs that we have from pre-K through grade 12. And adult ed is, Tina, where on the schedule is adult ed?
Because adult ed is basically revenue driven,
right.
They usually don't have a big presentation. This year we will have some conversation because they may need a little bit more money than they've received in the past. So they will probably be when we do central office, which I think is the last meeting in the second March meeting.
So in terms of a program and student needs, those are the only ones that you won't hear today. You'll hear the adult ed one later on. So by the end of the day, you're also going to have some numbers and some figures. But what's important to remember is that we're at the beginning of a 3 to 4 month process, and the numbers will likely look different by the end of the process. And that's because there are still some unknowns, such as there may be some adjustments in state subsidy and health insurance rates. And as our priorities become clearer, those numbers can change. So at this point in the process, even though you'll have some numbers, it's really more important to focus on our student needs than our numbers, because it's those needs that will help us set our priorities later on in this process. So you'll hear numbers, but it's this process that will dictate the final numbers. It's our hope that this process is transparent, which is one of the reasons we're taping this, and taping it so all of our meetings will be available on our website. We also have a couple of committee members that weren't able to attend all of today's meeting or part of today's meeting. But we also want it to be a very collaborative process. By law, school board has a responsibility to set the budget. So it is advisory in that sense, but the feedback that we get, the work that we do on this committee will really drive the budget that's proposed to the school board. And on May 9th, it's scheduled to be presented to the school board, and then they'll vote on adopting it as a final budget at that time. That will be followed by the district budget meeting, which is on May 23rd, and then the validation referendum that's on June 14th. So between now and the beginning of May, we are going to have lots of discussions and prioritize items, and that will result in that proposed budget that will go before the entire board. And those discussions and prioritizing will take place at those Thursday night meetings that we have scheduled on March 3rd, 10th, and 24th. And then those are followed by informational meetings in each town, which we're doing 3 nights in a row, April 26th, 27th, and 28th. And we'll consider the input also that we get at those public meetings, and those will also help to inform the final budget that goes as a proposal to the school board. We've used this process for a couple of years, and we feel that it's worked well because there's been active participation and engagement from all the members of the committee. We've been able to have some respectful discussions and problem solve through some different difficult issues. Part of our success, we think, has been because there have been really focused discussions, and we've utilized our strategic plan to help us establish priorities. And we've also utilized the information that we'll get from our administrators today and then in upcoming meetings in March. Last year, our process was kind of challenged by a failed referendum vote. But even though that referendum vote failed, the final budget, the second budget proposal, really also utilized the feedback from this committee in making that second budget proposal. And the budget committee is purposely made up of members with different perspectives. We have administrators, we have school board, we have community members. But we all have kind of a common goal, and our common goal is to collaborate to develop a proposed budget that meets the needs of our students while taking into consideration the challenges and opportunities within our communities. It is no small task, and it's complicated, but I'm confident that together we can achieve that goal. So I want to thank you again for your time, for your commitment to the process, and for the commitment to your community. So thank you. I think we're ready to go. And
can't see you over there, Mary. Thank you, and good morning. We have a same process here today where we will be presenting our budgets from our academic programs, as Mary has said. I'd like to give just a little background on what we've done so far. Our administrative teams have been working on our budget since early mid-December. We now have a business manager, Stacy Field, and she has worked really hard to get us up to alignment with our budget lines and state codes. So there are quite a few differences this year as far as how we're going to present our budget. In the past, we've gone line by line and been able to do apples to apples comparison. So if we had employee training in Minot Consolidated Schools budget and it went up $500, we could say, you can see last year it was this much money and this year it's this much. Now some of our lines, many of our lines have been condensed into one line, and in other cases like special ed, a whole bunch of the lines had to be broken out. So we had all our K-8 instruction together, and they're supposed to be broken out by resource room, self-contained room, by school. So the special ed director has a big challenge, or had a big challenge to the budget process to now make sure all of the expenses that are associated with a specific program show in those lines only. And that's also what happened in many of our other situations. So we're going to proudly stand up and show you where there are big cuts, and you'll hear the principals go, my lines are down 1%, but the truth is, sorry to burst your bubble ahead of time, folks, but the truth is we've pulled things out of their budget and put them in the proper place. So my lines are going to be a great example. I had a lot of the system operations under the Office of the Superintendent, and they should have been in operations. So my lines are down significantly, but John's lines are up significantly because he got the transitions all into his lines. So we will be sharing with you summaries of each cost center and telling you what went up and what went down without going line by line, because it would take us forever to do that. And feel free to ask questions. I have about a binder about 6 inches, 8 inches thick with all the details. If you need them, we'd be glad to give them. And but we think the summary process is going to be an easier process rather than trying to explain which lines were condensed and where they all went. So that's going to be one difference for you.
I would like to have a copy of the full-blown line by line so that I can look at it just for my own educational purposes.
When I'm talking about, you certainly will have that. When I'm talking about the detail, I'm talking about when a teacher asks for crayons. I have a detail sheet of the crayons and the paper and the markers. That we don't give out. Like I said, the binder's this thick.
That
But you
level of
certainly can
granularity
have, yeah,
is
you
too
certainly
much.
can have line by line of each line that we have in our budget.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I'm not going to give that out today because we're not ready to do that, but you will see the general budget as we go through the process. A couple of things that we always talk about when we're working on the budget is just our general goals. And you can see I've got them projected up here. If you've been to any budget meetings in the last 4 years, you're going to know our goals are the same. And we always are talking about what do we need to do to maintain and support the current programs and facilities that we have. That's our maintenance of effort budget, which we will be talking about primarily today. The other goals that we have are to be sensitive to economic realities. Now, there are a lot of things we want to have. We have community members who want us to have no more than 20 students in a classroom. And we can't do that because it would be very expensive to add another 10 teachers to our budget. We know that we need to, if we're adding programs, we need to be really clear about why we're adding them and that they meet the goals of our strategic plan, which our community members have had a lot of participation in. So we are concerned about the bottom line, and we work really hard to make sure that there are no expenses in here that don't need to be in here. And of course, the last thing is working towards the promises of our strategic plan. So when we worked on our strategic plan starting 4 years ago, and we've updated it each year since, we have feedback from our communities about what they want for our school. So this is kind of like our vision, where we're going. And in the last few years, we've added some programs back in. We've improved our music program. We've added back in some science programs at the high school. We've added back some computer programs. So there are some things like that that have been added in, guided services, pre-K, in the last 4 years that have really gotten us to a place where we're really comfortable with the offerings that we have. And you're going to see that our new request, the priority list that's not in our regular budget at this point, is a lot smaller than it's been in the past few years. So that's a good thing when you're trying to get down to the bottom line and keep budgets from increasing a lot. But again, as Mary said, we start with what do our students need? What do we need to provide them for an education that will, help us meet our mission of students being prepared for the future? And then we look at the bottom line and we figure out how much of that can we actually accomplish in 1 year. And that's a big part of our process. It's also important to talk a little bit about money that we get, our revenue, and also historically over time what's happened with our budgets in this district. In 2008, the general purpose aid from the state was $975 million, or right around there. And it's not much more than that now. I think this year's general purpose aid is $983 million, or right around that amount. So in 8 years, we know salaries have gone up, costs for supplies have gone up, and materials, yet the state is not putting as much money into education as it has in the past. And that doesn't, the $973 million in the past didn't include the retirement benefits that the state used to pay, and now they've shifted back to school departments. So when you look at it dollar for dollar, we're actually getting less money for education than we had in the past. In RSU16, we had close to a $22 million budget in 2009, in 2008 before consolidation. That budget dropped to $17 million and $18 million range for many years, 3-4 years, before it started increasing. And the budget that we're presenting today is still over $1 million less than it was pre-consolidation. And so we are providing a pretty economical education to our students, and we're achieving above the state average, so we feel really proud about that. And sometimes I'm not sure people in the community realize the benefits to the district since consolidation. A significant amount of money has been saved, and student achievement has increased pretty significantly over that time. And that's information that we want to share. I share it every year when we do our budget presentations, and that's one of the reasons we try to make sure we have committee members here on this, town members here on this committee, because it's important for you to go back and make sure that that information is shared and people have a real accurate perspective of where we've been as a district financially and where we are now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about maintenance of effort for those of you who are new. If you're not new, you've heard this before. The budget that we have, that we're presenting, is a maintenance of effort budget. So basically, what do we feel we need to maintain current programs? There basically is nothing in here that's new. Those will be decided on by this committee, what we want to present forward to the school board for additional programming. And I also like to say maintenance of programs doesn't mean a flat budget, and sometimes people get confused about that, and they think if you say maintenance it means flat, and it doesn't, because again, costs go up. So first thing I want to talk about, everybody always wants to know the bottom line. And that's a little challenging to do at this stage of the game because there are still a lot of variables. But I'm going to give you the bottom line anyway, knowing that things may change or will change slightly as we go forward. So our current budget, FY16, is $20,615,000. The budget that you will see today is all of our comparisons. If we say something went up 1% or down 2%, that's on the adopted budget for FY16. And so I like to make everybody aware of that, because sometimes the adopted budget isn't actually what our expenses are. So you hire new teachers, you might have expected to have a certain amount in salaries, and sometimes that goes up or down, usually down a little bit. But all our comparisons are to the FY16 adopted budget. The FY17 draft proposal that we're bringing forward to you today and in the next few weeks is $20,950,000. So that's up a little over $300,000, which is about 1.6% increase. State revenues are projections. They may change. We always know that. It's a little easier because at least we have a projection this year. Last year we didn't even have a projection when we were starting the process. We are waiting to hear about a $23 million supplemental budget. If that passes in the legislature, that would mean that we would get an increase of $150,000 to $200,000 from the state, which would really help us a lot. And we have a few lines that aren't in this budget yet. Not many, so it won't make a big difference, but there are some lines like My Lines, improvement of instruction. That's a new line for us. We're working on that still. So there's a few things that will be added in over the next few weeks, or even tweaked a little bit if something was missing or misplaced.
What's your projection on what that is?
I don't have one. It's not a lot, $10,000, $20,000, but I really don't, like I said, it's not going to be a
just looking for a rough idea.
Yeah, it's not going to be a $100,000 increase, but there will be some slight changes.
Okay.
So one of the things that I learned from last year, it's always a little bit risky to put this type of a slide up, because people add up all the columns and say, oh my God, the budget is going up $1 million. And what they don't realize is there are places that have decreased because we don't need them anymore, and then there are some increases. So that's why I shared the $330,000 with you, so you have that in your mind. But special education costs are the proposed budget is up $208,000. And again, if you're reading the papers at all and watching the news, you're seeing that schools are struggling all over the state with exploding education costs. And we're seeing that here in RSU16 too. Our facilities needs, all those years that we were down to the $17, $18 million budgets, facilities were being neglected. And what you've heard us talk about over the last few years is now it's all coming to a time where we have to take care of our facilities. So there's a $146,000 increase in our facilities budget. We do have salary increases for our employees. They average around 3%. We have a 5% increase in health insurance premiums. We have no idea what that number is going to be. At my state superintendent's meeting, they suggested superintendents put in 6%. We put in 5% because in the last 4 years, we have never been over 5%. We had 0% 2 years ago, 3% last year. We have relatively healthy staff, and our insurance costs are lower than most schools in the district. So that's good news. But again, we will find out what that number is, and as soon as we find out, we adjust the number to actual. Norm?
On the health insurance, are we rated as RSU16 or as we rated across the state?
We are rated, RSU16 has its own experience factor. And so our bill is based on that factor. factor. So
Okay,
if
the
you,
experience more just for RSU16?
yes,
Okay, good.
correct?
Yes, what they do is, the MEA is who covers all schools in the state, and we used to all be in one pool, and the rate would be statewide for every school system, no matter what kind of experience you had individually. About 3 years ago, schools started asking for their experience mod, and Anthem had to do a lot of work to come up with that individually. And so as schools talked about going out to bid for their insurance, Anthem realized they needed to be more competitive to individual school systems. And so they started getting those rates. And so they still group you in high risk, low risk categories, but your rate is more individual to your system and what you might have had for usage.
Yeah, I understand going too well because I tried to, we still had the union to get it changed to private insurance and somebody else.
So, yeah, so health insurance is always a tricky thing. A 5% increase is $175,000. So if we are only at 3%, we will be able to drop that number down. And of course, if we're 6 or 7%, we will need to increase that number. But we feel like that's a pretty safe number for us.
Excuse me, Tina, are you
yes.
going to have this available? Is this something you can email to us, or?
We'll post it on the website.
Okay.
So all of the documents that you see today will be posted on the website. Okay. And I did ask the principals to bring copies of the PowerPoint, and if you would like me to have copies of this before the end of the day so you can walk away with them, I'd be glad to have Lauren bring
If
them
it's
over.
as long as it's posted, as long as we have access
yes.
some way.
Yeah,
okay.
we will make sure that
Yep.
it's all posted because people that, because we're taping it, people
Yeah.
can follow along with the documents as they watch the video if they're not here and they want to see the information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we also have 2 buses in our maintenance of effort budget, and we've been approved for 3 buses. We feel like we only need 2 to maintain our fleet at an appropriate level. And the good news is that we have 2 buses coming off cycle, so it actually will be a wash. We won't be paying for 2 buses, so by having the 2 new ones, we're kind of keeping in a cycle. The state will totally pay for this over a 6-year period, 5-year period. We have math program in here. Last year we requested a new math program for our K-6 students. We put in $30,000 in this year's budget to get us started with the program, and the follow-up to that is we need $20,000 more to purchase the rest of the full program. And that was presented as compromise last year. That was a cut we made when we had the failed budget. We cut out half of the math program, and so this is in maintaining the process that we started last year. And then we have some minor increases in sports. Again, as many of you have probably seen in the paper, unified basketball has become a big deal for us and for other schools. That has been paid for by a grant, so we are excited to keep that going, which means at this point it would need to go into the general budget. We have a middle school cross-country team that has gone from about 8 or 10 kids 3 years ago to 26 this year, so we need an assistant coach to help the one coach that's there running that program at the middle school. We have 2 programs that are really about Title IX and making sure we have equal access and participation of girls in sports. That's girls ice hockey and also girls lacrosse. So we have those programs going this year, but they've been funded in different ways. So we're in a co-op, and girls lacrosse has been mostly covered by Greg Gloucester. And so we have some responsibilities to be paying for this a little bit differently. Girls hockey, the girls on the hockey team were paying more than the boys were because they were self-funding their program a bit. So Carrie's going to give you better details on that in her budget, but we have some minor increases in sports. And again, we're still maintaining the programs that we currently have, but they weren't funded in the way we're funding them now. Anybody have any questions? No, we're covering a lot of information in that short
Tina,
amount of time.
on the buses, do we
Yes.
know like what the net difference is? Because we have some that are coming off.
So the net difference is about $2,000.
Okay.
So to get 2 new buses, it's going to cost us about $2,000 because we have 2 coming off cycle while 2 are coming on.
Okay.
Whoops, went in the wrong direction. So I'm going to have Stacy talk about revenues for the state, for the district.
Most of the work that we do is on the expenditure budget side, but of course we need a revenue budget to fund those expenditures. And our revenues have three sources: the state, local revenue, and other revenues. The state revenue we call EPS, Essential Programs and Services, and that is about 5 pages of calculations that the state sends to us on a form called an ED 279 to calculate how much money they will give us. This is based, if you remember, in LD1, where the state citizens voted for the state to pay 55% of education. That has never happened. And so that small amount between what the state raises and that 55% that we don't get from them rolls into our additional local. And we'll talk about that one in a minute. So the first local revenue picture that we come to is driven from that 279. It's called Mills for Education, and that's where the state decides how much mills each town or city has to raise locally so that the state will give them funds. It's kind of a match. You have to raise this much, we'll give you this much. So in the proposed budget, we're looking at about $35,000 more from the state, but locally we have to raise about $158,000 more to get that $35,000. So when we talk about more money from the state, it's not always beneficial if we have to raise more to get that. The additional local is based on the cost-sharing formula, and those are determined individually by each school department, each school system, where you decide how you're going to cost-share among your towns in your RSU or your SAD. That is based on our funding formula, and anything, once we have the state revenue and the local that we have to raise, and any other revenue, anything left is determined by that cost-sharing formula. So usually the last number we come up with is that additional local, because we subtract everything else first that we know we're getting. The other revenue category, when we say we know we're getting, this one's very flexible because there are items in there that we can project, but certainly they're not always accurate until we can get them. So for instance, we have tuition that comes in. Years ago, we had a lot of tuition money that came in. That has dwindled down. We only have 2 tuition students this year. One is an 11th grader and one is a 9th grader, so we are projecting we will have that tuition next year. The year after, you'll see a reduction once that 12th grader graduates. That amount that we can bill for also comes from the state. The state calculates the state average tuition, and so they take all the costs statewide and divide it out, and they come up with a number that we can bill for tuition. That number comes out usually in December. This year it was a little over $10,000. So you'll see a $20,000 projection on the tuition amount that we think will come in. We have miscellaneous revenue. So if we have refunds from the prior year, say we pay a bill in June and then we get a refund on it in August, we've already closed out the fiscal year. And so we can't credit that refund back to the expenditure. We have to bring that in as a prior year expenditure. So sometimes we do have some monies from that source. Other miscellaneous revenues include E-rate. So when you look on your phone bill and you see those little charges for universal funds and all that stuff, that is a federal program where that money is collected and then it's distributed to schools and libraries. There's all kinds of paperwork to apply for that money, and there's different stages throughout the year. But most of those are being phased out. So for instance, on our phone bills, we get refunded based on how much is available in that E-rate fund. But that is phasing out, so within 2 to 3 years, we won't get that money anymore. So we have reduced that in the proposed budget because over the years, they're phasing it out. So we're getting a smaller percentage each year. We have some fees that we generate from online payments. The company we use sends us back fees, so every couple of days we get, it's maybe $5, maybe $8. It's not a big source, but we do use it to help offset the costs of the budget. Sometimes we get insurance refunds. So the insurance company for workers' comp will bill us based on our salaries, and they bill up front. At the end of the year, when we close everything out, we submit to them the full amount of the salaries that we paid. They recalculate what that workers' comp charge should be, and we either get a refund or they bill us the balance. And so those refunds come in as a revenue on the revenue budget as well.
Do they come back with interest for them to have luck?
They do not.
Of course not.
No, but they don't charge us interest if we've underpaid, so there is a balance there. Anything you want to add, Tina, on the revenue budget?
No, just unless you want to talk a little bit about fund balance or...
Okay, yeah. Fund balance, so each year when we close our budget out, the auditors come in and they calculate any money that we've had left. That rolls into what's called a fund balance. We can never use that money until it has been audited, which means we've already started the next fiscal year. So it is available to us the following fiscal year. So when we closed out FY15 and that number was calculated, it was not available for us to use until FY17. So 2 years ago, we used the $328,000 to the fund balance. If we can stay consistent with that, it helps that line anyway in the revenue budget be flat funded, and so that does not equate into an increase. And so when we ended FY15, we had the $973,320. However, keep in mind, that ended June 30, 2015. We had already allocated out of our fund balance the prior year $325,000 for FY16. So that is not in the auditor's numbers because that starts July 1, which is the next fiscal year. And so we are projecting that we would have the $325,000 available again because our fund balance was $648,320 after we took out that amount we've allocated for this year, being FY16.
And we usually feel like it's pretty safe to use about half of it. So the 648 is perfect for us because, again, each year we try to use half of it, knowing we can offset, tax increases by using some of that fund balance or savings account. And so we're right in line with being able to keep it at the 325 again. So that feels good.
Is that the goal, to continue to always do that versus actually getting that number down so that you're actually paying for what you're supposed to be paying for?
So that's like a savings account, and so no business wants to be with zero savings account because you never know what's going to happen. The state doesn't allow us to have more than 3% in there. And so regular business would be encouraged to have 2 to 3 months of revenue saved up for payroll or if there's some emergency. The school departments are only allowed to have 2 or 3 weeks, and that's 2 or 3 weeks worth. So keeping it right around $600,000 is just around that 3% mark.
Okay,
and
so it's just a business practice.
Yes,
okay.
You always want to have some fund balance because if we ran into an emergency, you can't spend it. You'd have to go back to voters and say we have an emergency, we need to spend some fund balance. But that's what it's for, and you don't ever want that to be zero.
Right, because you need cash flow. We do have a $20 million budget, but we don't get $20 million on July 1 to run the school department. The towns pay 1/12 of their assessment each month, and the state gives us our portion each month. So the money comes in and the money goes out. In a month, our payroll, the first payroll of the month is around $400,000 to $500,000. The second payroll of the month is when we generate the Anthem charges, the employer portion of what we have to pay Anthem, and that payroll can be $690,000 for one payroll. So by having some fund balance, it helps with the cash flow so that when that payroll comes due, we have the cash on hand to make those payments.
No, it makes sense.
And then we have some capital improvement accounts. One account, we have a feasibility study. Tina, if you want to talk about those.
Sure. We have a capital improvement fund, which when Mike Wilhelm came in as an interim superintendent 4 years ago, one of the things that he noticed and shared was that there was no reserve money for our facilities should there be, a boiler.
Flood, anything.
Yes. And so we've started increasing how much we had in there, and every year we've tried to add a little bit more. And we still don't have a huge capital improvement fund compared to like the town might, because we started from zero in 2009. We had to because of consolidation, or we did because of consolidation. And but we're up to $168,000 remaining in there at this time. So we feel good about that. We will be adding more into that. Last year we added $160,000 into that. This committee will have to have a discussion about how much they feel we should add this year, and John will present his budget and we'll make a recommendation based on what he knows we have for expenses next year. But we do have a more healthy capital improvement fund now than we've had in the past. We put in $95,000 in a feasibility study 2 years ago, I think. 2 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. And we are down, and we have been using that again. It's to research the overcrowding issues at Bruce Whittier and discuss our needs for dealing with that overcrowding. So we have done an enrollment study that goes out 20 years, and we've also hired an architect to do a plan for us. So we are down to $32,000 left in that, but again, we still have some money to deal with any additional costs that come forward with that. We won't be looking to put any more money in that this year, from what I understand from our process from the review team. But we do have a little bit of money in there that's still open for work that we need to do on that initial process of reviewing or researching the issues. And then we have a technology reserve account that has about $30,000 in it. And you're going to hear about that later because we're going to recommend putting more in there in preparation for purchasing laptops next year. So those are just some additional, again, those are in their reserve accounts. They can only be spent, those bottom three, for the purpose they're identified for, and they're not in the general budget. We do have a few unknowns, and Stacy, do you want to talk about those, or
Sure.
do you want me to?
Sure. The supplemental budget is what Tina mentioned early on, that there may be some money available additional from the state that we would get a share of. One thing to keep in mind on that is if they have not decided by the time we go to town meeting, any additional money we get after that, there's pending legislation whether or not that can be used. What was discovered last year, they used to have us do a warrant article that said if we get additional state money, we can use that. That situation happened last year. A lot of systems went to their district budget meeting in March, and I think it was May or June, May when that money came out, and the systems that had already had their town meeting were not allowed to use that. So we are hoping that that language will pass the legislature this year, but if not, if that money does come after the fact, then it would go into our fund balance to support a future budget. It could not support this one. The state agency client, that is money we receive from the state for students that are eligible for that amount, for that reimbursement, I'll call it. What happens is they get services and we pay for them, and then the money comes back to us. Keep in mind that's only for students that are eligible for those services. If those students move out of the district, then we no longer have those students, and those we wouldn't get refunded. We wouldn't pay it out, but we also wouldn't get that money, and so that revenue source would not be there.
What are those
So-
services?
For foster students, if
Okay.
basically if they have any special ed needs or any counseling needs, things like that. But for state agency clients, we have been budgeting $90,000 in revenue for state agency clients, and Stacy and I had the conversation that that's pretty risky because you really don't have any idea how many foster students children are going to be in your district in a year. So instead of budgeting the 90, because if we put it in as a revenue, we've dedicated certain things to be purchased, then that's a little bit risky. So we've dropped that $40,000 down to $50,000. We feel like 50 is pretty safe. We've been close to we'll get close to 90 this year for the foster children we have in the district. But so there is a reduction of $40,000 to that line, only again because it's an unpredictable amount. And the same thing for E-rate. When Mike Wilhelm was here, he put all of these revenues into the revenue line, and we have been utilizing them. But because E-rate is going away and they're reducing each year, like this year we had $39,000 budgeted, but we got about $28,000. So instead of hoping we're going to get something close to what we received this year, we're reducing that to $15,000 because we don't know what we're going to get next year yet.
Right. If you build your revenue budget, it has to support the expenditure budget. So if these revenues do not come in and they're not realized, now you have to look back to your expenditure budget and cut your budget by these amounts of revenues that you projected but did not come in. So it's better to guess safe on the ones that are not guaranteed.
And of course, if more comes in, it goes into our fund balance, we can use it the next year, which is always a good thing. We did make some reductions in our heating, fuel, and our gasoline lines because those costs are down. That's always a little bit risky. You don't know what they're going to be next year. We tried to keep what we felt was safe, but again, that's an unknown. Health insurances are unknown, and then, like we said, there's a few budget lines that are not complete, and the improvement of instruction line is one of them. I'm going to move us along so that we can get to our presentations. We do have some cost reductions, and each year we like to point out if there are some things that we know weren't budgeted that are kind of bigger ticket items. We have one less elementary teacher. We have 4 teachers at the kindergarten level this year at PCS, and their numbers will show with 3 teachers they'd have about 18 kids in a classroom. If we had 4, they'd have 13. So we have not been supporting classrooms of 13 typically. So we have a retirement. So there will be no impact on staff, but there will be a savings to the district of 1 elementary teacher less. We have the 2 buses, and again, that's basically budget neutral, even though it looks like a savings. Laptop purchases, you're going to hear in the technology presentation, we're not recommending any purchase of any devices this year because we know that we're going to have an option to buy some used equipment next year from the state, from the MLTI, and that's going to be a huge savings for us. We'll go into detail on that during the technology presentation. Summer school, we've decided that we're going to cut K-6 summer school out of our budget, and I, again, would like to go into detail on that when we get to that section, so I'm not going to go into it right now. The bottom line is we're not seeing a big difference in student achievement from that $28,000. We've been doing research for 3 years now, and the national research on summer school shows that it doesn't make an improvement in student achievement either. So we've got quite a bit of data saying that if we're going to do something to improve student achievement, it should be something other than summer school, probably for the younger kids. But we'll talk a little bit more about that then. And then, we made some cost reductions in heating and fuel and transportation fuel.
Question,
yes.
The breakfast program, is that going away as well too? Is that part of cost reduction as well? Or is that because it was funded, or supposed to be funded?
It's not a cost, well, it wasn't ever budgeted for us to be paying for it, so we are absorbing the additional cost, and we will have to make other cuts this year to get through the cost to the district. Mm-hmm. So there's not really a cost savings because it was never expected
to begin with, right?
To be, there's nothing ever budgeted for this, and we are paying pretty heavily for it.
So after March 1st, I think it's going away.
Yes, March 11th, I think, is the last day for everyone eating free for those universal meals. The last thing that I have here is we talked about the MOE budget, the maintenance of effort. There are some things that you will be hearing us talk about that we want added in that's not in the current budget. It'll be considered by this group, whether it makes the next budget or not. Our biggest priority is a social worker. We need a half-time social worker at the high school, and that's a capacity issue, so that's on our priority list here. We need a modular for Bruce Whittier Middle School to deal with the overcrowding. We have looked into purchasing a used modular to get us through until we have a building project or a decision on how we're going to handle it. And that will cost us about $25,000 a year over the next 4 years. If we get the modular, we also want to have a special ed teacher. We would like to bring a special ed program to the district for kids who are in out-of-district placements right now, so we're paying $50,000 a child in out-of-district placement because we don't have the room or the program to do some of that work in district. So if we can't do this without the modular because we don't have space, but if we do, this will be a budget neutral request because we will be able to reduce our out-of-district placement costs and hire our own teacher for doing some of that. And it actually would only take bringing one student back to cover the cost of the teacher. So that's in there as an option. It also, we may be able to reduce it enough to cover the social worker. But at this point, those are things that we're thinking about if we get modular.
Is that advantageous, though, to do that versus is it based on the parents or the student? By bringing them back to a local resource, that's the goal, versus they're still getting quality service, I'm assuming, somewhere else, but
The goal is least restrictive environment, and having students in a school department with normally developing peers is always a good thing. But you have to have the program to be able to, do that, or the space. And it's not cheap to run them in district either, because they need a lot of services and support. So that's why the social work and the special ed teacher would be essential. But right now, and you'll hear Carrie talk a little bit about her program, and Holly, actually it will probably be Holly that talks about it during the special ed. During the special ed presentation. But these are pretty big needs for us right now, and we have 17 students in out of district placement, so that's quite a few.
And how much is that per student?
It depends on the program. It can run anywhere from 40 to 80. Yeah. And if they need residential, it can be $250,000. But we don't have any in residential, which is a good thing. But
So
40 to $80,000
per year per student.
Yes. Very expensive. We have $450,000 in out-of-district placement costs. 6 of those students moved in last year unexpectedly, already in out-of-district placement, so we had to absorb the cost. We froze the budget in January last year to help absorb the cost, and then it's properly funded this year, so we're not in that situation. But again, that's one of those things that districts all across the state are struggling with, and there is conversation at the state how to deal with that, because they're not funding it appropriately for school departments. So it's really on the school departments to figure out how to handle the increases.
do the statistics show, though, that that'll be something long-term sustainable, so that you'll constantly have a flow of that level of students to support the schools, more or less? I mean, there's nothing guaranteed,
right.
but that's been a pretty consistent statistic.
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, we see more and more needs. Students with severe mental health issues and behavioral issues, and so I don't anticipate those problems going away anytime in the near future.
Okay.
And then, of course, we've priority items, capital improvement. We want to add more money back into that, and we're also recommending adding some money into our technology reserve. So these are all the items that are kind of up for us to discuss here, and they're not in the regular budget as you see it presented. Many of them are somewhat cost neutral, but not all of them.
Okay.
So that's the end of the overview of the budget. We went into quite a bit of detail. I know the Finance Committee wanted to make sure everybody had some of the bigger picture as we went forward. And we're going to start now with building level presentations. We have Rick Benoit, PCS, will be going first for the elementary staff. And typically what happens is the first person that goes explains a little bit more, and then you're going to hear that as the second and third go, if salaries are up, which they are, 3%, or benefits are up, we know 5%, every one of them probably won't have to explain that, but they'll have them on their slides if there's increases and decreases.